Welcome to the Genre Hustle, your virtual sci-fi fantasy writers group. I'm Anton.
I'm AP.
I'm Chris.
I'm Lucy.
I'm Carter.
And today we're talking about inciting incidents. So last time we talked about first sentences. And so in this idea of keeping with the beginning of the book, the beginnings of our podcast, Lucy, give us what's an inciting incident?
Sure. So an inciting incident is generally understood as the incident or event that thrusts the protagonist into the action of the story. It's the event that changes the course of the main character's life. It's when Harry Potter gets his letter from Hagrid to go to Hogwarts. It's when Luke sees and reads the message from Princess Leia. It's the point at which you learn what the rest of the story is going to be about, essentially. You can also think about it like a call to adventure. And after the character decides to answer the call, his life will never be the same again.
Right, perfect. So as with every episode, we all submit an example from our own writing. And Chris, you're going to read your inciting incident from your novel, right?
I am. So the book is called The Android and the Killer. It's about an android named Roger who's a drug dealer in a near-future Los Angeles. And the inciting incident takes place when he's escaped up onto a rooftop to avoid a riot. And he comes across a mysterious sculpture that draws him in. So here we go. The sculpture rose up and crested at the top as if an arthropod of some sort stood on its back legs, its exoskeleton bending in the middle where two separate plates joined. Buried deep inside the intricate winding materials were colors that mixed together and swelled in his mind, soothing somehow, in contrast with the sounds of the growing riot on the street below, the screams, the clash of metal, the cracking of bone that he tried to ignore. The construction of the piece seemed random at first glance, but then he began to discern patterns in the design which he chased down eagerly. It was intoxicating. And then Roger felt something else, something wrong. He found his mind locked in place. Alerts flashed and disappeared as soon as they popped up. He struggled to find a way out of the trap he was in, but every pathway, every logical escape was just a door slammed in his face. And then there was darkness.
I love that. I remember that scene really stood out to me when I beta read this a few months ago. It sounds like you've changed it a little bit since the original version. But yeah, I think it totally works as an inciting incident. It kind of marks the point where Roger stops doing his normal day-to-day of selling drugs in like totally apocalyptic Hollywood, which is also cool. But here he starts to develop a deeper, more human sensibility about this art thing, which is a huge moment for him. I even think there's a chance you could bring out that moment more and kind of emphasize how much of a huge change it is. And like just the fact that he is not going to be able to go back to his previous way of operating and seeing things after this, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what Carter's saying completely. This is the point in the story where if this didn't happen, his life would just continue as a drug-dealing robot, android. I'm sorry, I defer to your expertise in that field.
He's an android, man. Come on.
But yeah, if he had never run into this piece of art on the rooftop, then he would just continue dealing drugs and live out his life, and there would be no story.
Yeah, and I think one of the most important things that an inciting incident can do is initiate conflict within the story. So here we have something human that is awakened in an android. He is appreciating art, for God's sake. And this is massive because it means the administration, even though we don't get this, is going to shut him down, which is massive conflict. It's telling us what the rest of the story is going to be about. How is Roger going to deal with the fact that he has this massive secret now?
Yeah, I agree. Everything in this scene works, and I really like the specificity. I like the cables that look like muscles and the keyboard keys. I love that this is it's such a great image, and then you have other senses. So Roger, he smells something or he touches, right? There's something else in there, right?
Yeah, the description is great.
Right. And then it goes to black, which I think also really works because it's very dramatic and it's very evocative. And I think whereas in a lot of sci-fi or fantasy, I think there's a lot of action, there's a lot of something, things whirling around or, something interrupts the scene very violently, whereas this, I think, is very intimate and it's very specific to Roger, and it does everything we've been talking about, where it turns over that world, where suddenly everything that Roger the android thinks is no longer there, and it literally blacks him out, which I think is great.
And it's like you said, it's internal, so it's telling you what is going to be coming in this book. A lot of it is internal, as opposed to egregious action.
Yeah, I was going to ask you to talk about that with your book, as opposed to being an action-heavy book. I think a lot of your themes are more subtle.
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot of action, particularly in the third act. There's a big finale, but yeah, a lot of it is about the internal journey of the android.
It sounds like it would be all action with your title, like the killer the killer robot.
The killer is the human part of the story, but we won't get into that here.
There has to be some action.
Sure.
Right?
Oh,
There's
there
got to be
is.
something.
Lots. So what are some other examples of some inciting incidents?
I have a good one. I think that The Hunger Games has a great inciting incident, because I think one of the most important things that an inciting incident can do is ignite this hidden desire within a character. And when Katniss's sister's name is pulled from the hat, whatever it is they have, and Katniss decides that she can't watch her sister go in, and she volunteers herself. I think that's super effective, because up until that point in the novel, the family has sort of, the relationship between them has been tense, and Katniss's place within the family has been kind of unsteady, and this really awakens this desire in her to protect her sisters. So I think it's a great example.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. It makes me think about, like, what is the difference between a call to action and an inciting incident? Because that is definitely a really clear, double duty thing, that our favorite term that does both.
It's A then B very quickly together.
Right. And you, not only do you get this is what the rest of the story is about turn, but you also get the character hook. You get the protagonist is taking charge now. It's not just stuff that's happening to them. And so, yeah, I mean, it's just kind of something that I think about a lot of the time, because when I'm writing, I don't always try to do both at the same time. Sometimes I will start a story with an inciting incident and then have the call to action later, that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think this is a really good example of, maybe going beyond what an inciting incident should be, and, really working at the craft, because in Chris's example, and in a lot of inciting incidents, something is happening to the protagonist. It's something out of their control, and they don't really protag. And we'll do an episode on protagonists later on, but for now, the android sees the structure and something happens to him.
It's a passive thing.
Exactly. And Katniss makes a decision right away and protags. I mean, so that's, like Carter said, that's double duty.
Mm-hmm.
And the mystery is evoked. In your example, Chris, that's where the big question of what next, what's going to happen to Roger in this one. And very much the same in the example of the Hunger Games, or in any of these really sort of classic examples, is what is this character going to do? Oh my God, they've given up this world that we've been reading about for these first 2 or 3 chapters, and now this thing that has turned everything upside down, and now what's going to happen? And that really is when it's done well, it really does keep the reader going. They want to see what's going to happen next.
And it's a setting up of the rest of the book as well. We know from that moment on of the inciting incident that the climax is going to answer what the inciting incident sets up. Katniss is going to win at the Hunger Games, essentially, because she volunteered herself.
Right,
It's
exactly.
the journey.
In the classic examples, right, exactly. It's the parallels, it's the setup and the completion, and they in the best examples or classic examples, they'll mirror each other in some way. Yeah.
Carter, you had an example of another inciting incident, right?
Oh, yeah. I'm reading this book right now. It's Kraken by China Mieville. Super on-brand book for me. And I do really like it, but it has a good example of like a inciting incident that isn't really a call to action. So the main character is like a museum curator, and he has this huge giant squid on display, like his like prized exhibit or whatever, and it disappears. It gets stolen, and it is definitely the inciting incident of the book because you know that, oh, that's what the story is about, but it doesn't really tell you anything about what the character is going to do. And at least where I am right now in the book, he hasn't really taken an active role in anything. He's definitely concerned about it, but he doesn't like see that the squid is stolen and he's immediately like, I will solve this mystery, you know?
So would you call him a reluctant hero?
Yeah, I mean, he's very passive, like throughout at least the first half of the book, which is, and it works because in that book, it's sort of more about reality kind of falling apart around him. Like London kind of unravels and he learns about all these secret factions and like all these gods wandering the streets that no one knows about. So you're kind of experiencing all this weird shit through his eyes, which is interesting, but he's not really doing any pro-tagging, which is maybe another issue.
So that's another point I think with Inciting Incident is that it doesn't. We've been talking about examples where it's very character, very close third person, very in that person's point of view. But I think with a lot of stories, like what you're saying, is you can. I don't want to say take a wider view because I think it's still about point of view, but I think you can take the wider view of the world, if you will, and that the inciting incident can be to the story, if you follow me, you know what I'm saying, where the character it's still involved, but you were saying like the story is so much bigger.
Yeah, and I think an inciting incident that works is a real delineation between what happened, the world before and the world that comes after. So regardless of whether it's internal or the character is passive at that moment or active, it has to demarcate a moment where everything has now changed. The stakes have changed. The character's life has changed. The world is flipped. And that's the important thing.
Right. What was before is different now. So even in your example with Kraken, this giant squid is stolen. I mean, that's an amazing, exciting. That's an amazing thing to happen where the guy walks into work one day. He's like, oh, hey, where's my giant squid? Oh, wait, it's gone.
His life as the protagonist knows it is turned upside down.
Right. It's a great hook. And I guess it is just sort of like an active versus passive thing. Like in Chris's example from the killer and the android, not the robot, I got it right because I respect your work.
Thank you, Carter.
I thought it was the android and the killer.
I wasn't going to say anything.
Wait, yeah.
What were you just saying, Carter?
Respect better.
I mean, it's a huge character moment, but it doesn't really give the reader too much of a sense for what is going to happen next. I mean, he blacks out, so he's not even active at the end of the inciting incident, which is really interesting. It's like sort of a different approach than the Hunger Games thing.
It would normally be the moment in which the main character starts to debate. Oh, now I have this massive conflict. What am I going to do about it, sort of thing.
Right.
Right. What's the drama?
That would be the general start of the debate.
He has a moment in the next paragraph. He begins his
right
debate.
into it.
But yeah,
Debate
you're
is coming.
absolutely right. And I think,
He
the
becomes
writer...
an art critic.
He becomes an art critic and goes on to a successful career writing for the New York Times. But, like with a writer like China Mieville, he's, mastered his craft. And, if he's going to like have a character who's a little bit more passive or wind out the story a little bit longer, he's probably earned that right. You kind of he's earned the reader's trust over a series of really successful novels.
Right. Enough interesting stuff is going to happen that you don't really need to be following a really like dynamic protagonist the whole time or anything.
Learn the rules, and then when you learn the rules, you can break them.
Precisely, yeah. Cool. All
That's
right.
season 2 of the podcast.
Right. Season
Breaking
2.
the rules. Genre hustle. Uncensored.
All right. Well, that was really good. So well done, everyone. That was Inciting Incident. This has been The Genre Hustle, your virtual sci-fi fantasy writing group, and we'll see you all next time.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.